We welcome you to the Ghost Star N.E.A.R show, where we discuss and explore paranormal phenomena and legends as well. I'm your host, Keith Johnson, the co-founder of New England Anomalies Research, and I am so truly honored to have a good friend who's been on our show multiple times before, never runs out of knowledge, Andrew Lake.
Hey Keith,
how you doing?
Excuse my perspiration. It is a warm August day.
It is a warm August day, but at least we've got a little bit of a breeze.
Yeah, it's not a bad day, but a little warm.
Right. Well, Andrew, I know that you are just steeped in knowledge of this place. You personally are part of the history because you've had so many experiences, and of course our good friends Ed and Pat Morgan.
Yes.
We're good friends of them. So, tell us a little bit about this area for those who are not familiar with it.
Okay, thumbnail version. Right now we're on Ramtail Road, and it's located in Foster, Rhode Island, right off of Route 6. And we're on what's known as the Ramtail Bridge, and right over the Ponegantset River. This river used to power a lot of mills. As a matter of fact, there were 3 mills originally in the 1700s. In this direction, in the little hamlet known as Hopkins Mills. Obviously, you have the Hopkins family, and there were 3 mills that were powered. And in 1791, a gentleman named William Potter came out of Warwick and settled here. He was an educated man. He was a mason and so on and so forth. And his reason for moving out here was to take advantage of this river. He wanted to build a mill of his own. Mm-hmm. And by the early 1800s, he had gotten together with his son Olney and his brother-in-law and his 2 sons-in-law to put their combined money together and buy a parcel of land that's only about about 400 or 500 yards down the river in that direction. It was perfect to put a mill up on. And he made a deal with a family that owned the property on this side of the river, so he could build a dam across the river. And they set up this woolen mill. It was called the Foster Woolen Manufactory. And the whole process there was to take raw wool and turn it into fabric and yarn. And eventually, toward the end of its history, I believe it even went into cotton. But it was an impressive mill and a little village built up around it.
Now, where does the name Ramtail come from?
Yeah, that's a good one. A lot of people wonder because it is interesting. And I think Marjorie Matthews, a late local historian, I think explained it best with her input on the story. What it was is when they were processing the wool, this gnat would rise up off of it, that they'd have to take these shears and cut it off. And it would curl up off. And so when you cut it, it fell to the floor. It looked like a little ram's tail.
Hence the name Ramtail.
So at the end of the day, when you went into that mill, it was like, what do you manufacture in here? Ram's tails? Because the floor would be just covered with this. Wow. So this wasn't the only factory of its type to get that nickname. Matter of fact, in the village of Scituate, North Scituate, there was a mill there that had the same nickname.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, I found in 1937 a U.S. travel guide that mistakenly put the legend that we're going to talk about here in the Scituate village because of those 2 mills having that same nickname.
I grew up in Scituate and I never even knew that.
Yeah, well, when you dig as much as I do, you know, you don't have a life like me. You're always in libraries talking to old folks and stuff. You learn these interesting facts. But the point is, they started this mill here, and it was very, very successful. Matter of fact, it was an impressive start. I mean, the village that sprouted up around it was quite beautiful. They figured there was about 5 houses for residents. Plus, they had the waste house. They had a blacksmith shop to repair any machinery that would break down in the mill, and so on and so forth. And it was rather impressive. And what has been passed down through the generations by the folks here in Foster, the families that have been here forever. They said that the gardens there were beautiful. And if you go in this woods, you still find plants that aren't natural. They were planted there by the folks of Ramtail.
So even though the houses are gone,
yeah, there's
plants, the gardens are still there?
Barely footprints of their foundations are out there. You can, if you look, you can find where the houses were. But unfortunately, after the '38 hurricane, when this piece of property was sold over here, that was part of the Ramtail property, guy turned it into a sand quarry and went in there with a lot of bulldozers and pushed stuff into the holes. So a lot of stuff got bulldozed, unfortunately. And you know. So, you know, times change, you know, and nature heals. There's very little of the factory that can be seen left. The parts of the dam is still there. The wheel socket is still there because the wheel was internal. It was an internal wheel.
So it was in a water wheel pit.
Exactly. And but everything was going great. And Peleg, from what I understand, he and his father-in-law William Potter, they were doing rather well. Matter of fact, I was talking to another researcher that we know, Thomas D'Agostino. He found that they bought another mill up in Gloucester, but it didn't last long.
Right.
It wasn't a good venture. But that may have been what led to Peleg's downfall. I mean, he was an esquire. He was an educated man. He was a mason himself, and he wasn't any frivolous dummy, but he may have gone a little too far beyond his means. And it seems that he got himself into a little bit of debt, and he had to sell off some of his land, and he even by May of 1822 had to sell off his holdings in the factory, and there was a lot of bad feelings about that. I've talked to people who have had the story passed down through generations, and they say that it isn't myth or legend, that people working at the mill on the morning of the 18th of May, 1822, said that there was a horrible argument between William Potter and his son-in-law,
So that's
Peleg
not
Walker.
just legend.
No, and he was heard to say, as he was coming out of the door, they were insisting he hand over his keys to the property, because it was his duty at night, after the second shift was over and done with, when the sun was down, it was his job to go around and lock the place up. And it was a thing of honor for him.
Right.
And they wanted him to hand over the keys. And the thing is it wasn't legal till the 19th that the transfer had happened. So he wasn't going to give away the keys. He's insisting, I'm going to carry out my duties to the end. And he said to them as he walked out the door, the next time you take these keys from me, they'll be from the pocket of a dead man. And he was heard saying that. And what happened is he came there that evening and told everybody extinguish the lanterns and shut down the wheels and the spindles and everything, and everybody head on out, and he's going to lock up. Now what his duty would be first thing in the morning was to ring the bell in the factory to wake everybody up. He was also like the alarm clock and open all the doors and everything, and people would get back to work. Well, on the morning of the 19th, there was no bell. And people were like, oh, that argument, I don't know what's going on. We better go over to the mill, see what's going on. And it was locked up. And they're like, something's not right. Someone go get the Potters over in Hopkins Mills, which is, again, only about a mile from here. They got the Potters, and the Potters ordered, break a window. Someone get in there, because the door's been locked from the inside. And the campfire version is that Peleg hung himself from the bell rope.
Right.
And they found him dead, and true to his word, they took the keys out of his pocket. They buried him not in the Walker's family lot at the end of this road out on Central Pike. They buried him instead up at Hopkins Mills in the Potter's lot next. And his wife, Mary, who never remarried, is buried next to him. And I think Peleg has probably one of the best epitaphs you could ever have for a ghost story. Eternity, life how short, eternity how long.
Wow.
I mean, what a statement.
I know,
because what happened is within...
that could be a legend in itself.
Exactly, because within a few short nights, people were getting woken up at midnight by the bell ringing, and the doors were locked. And when the Potters would come, because they could hear the bell ringing, nobody was ever found inside the mill. They took the rope down. It became so bad. And it was recorded by a guy named Clausen, who used to write for the Providence, not the Journal, I think it might have been the Providence something, because the papers have changed names over the years, so excuse me for getting the name. It might have been the Journal, the Providence Evening Bulletin, but it was one of the early Providence papers. And he had recorded that when he came out here to inquire about it, he was told that two guys coming home from Hopkins Mills saw the ghostly figure of Peleg and his lantern going from building to building to building. And get this is a subtle thing that it sunk into my head years later, and we'll get into detail in a moment. But they said they knew it was Peleg Walker because of his odd gait. Which makes me wonder, how many ghosts do you have down here if you have to identify the ghost by its weird gait? But because of that, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but because of that, people didn't want to work here. The bell kept ringing, people were talking about seeing ghosts, and they started to pull out of here. They started to go to Pawtucket, because there was more work up there in Cumberland and Woonsocket and Pawtucket up there at those mills. And from that point, from 1822 and on to about 1850, the business went in and out of several hands, out of state, other families, and by 1850, there was nothing going on there anymore, and it was basically closed down. In 1860, a guy named Jonathan Ellis, who ran the stagecoach from Providence to Putnam, he would stop here at Hopkins Mills. He bought the land and decided to rent out the old mill houses as apartments. Well, in 1860, a woman who was originally from the village of North Scituate she came here to live. She was never married, didn't have any children. And she disappeared in December of 1860, just after Christmas. And they ended up finding her dead body down where the Barden Reservoir is now, where this Ponagansett goes. It was nothing but like a marshy swamp. And they found her in her nightgown, dead. And they figured what happened is she got up in the morning with her pail to get some water out of the running river. And being a fairly elderly woman, the water pulled her off the embankment, and it being like, what 40 degrees? It probably, hypothermia set in immediately.
Right.
Nobody heard her fall in, and she died. Well, shortly after she died, the people living in the old mill houses as apartments started seeing Betsy walking around in her nightgown.
Wow.
And that was it. Everyone was done down here. And Jonathan Ellis, Richards, he took the buildings down for the wood and the nails.
Right.
And left the cellar holes. And it was in the Rhode Island census in 1886.
85,
86.
85, I think,
Yeah, the top of page 36.
Yeah.
Perry, the head of the census.
Yeah.
When he came to Foster, he said, well, he's recording the mills. He's like, well, what about this ramtail down here? And everybody here in Hopkins Mills went, nobody's going to open that place up again. And he was
Right.
like, why? Why do you say that? And they're like, because the place is haunted.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, it's the only census anywhere in the United States of America that has a location officially recorded in brackets as being haunted.
So here in Rhode Island, we have the only officially haunted location.
Exactly. And when Clausen found that in the 30s, he was like, what the heck is that all about? And he came out here.
Yeah.
And he recorded it, but it was more of a campfire story.
Yes, right.
But, that's in a nutshell the Ramtail story. But as far as, the paranormal, you and I have been out here over the years many times, as well as some other of our colleagues. And you begin to find out that it just isn't Peleg down here, and it just isn't Betsy. There's all kinds of activity down here. And over the years, I've interviewed people who didn't know of this place's reputation, and they've had experiences that mirror others. So not only is this, Rhode Island's official haunted spot, I can say in southern New England, this is probably one of the most haunted locations around.
Wow. And you've grown up here in the area. You've experienced things, so many things, and of course, I have a vested interest, my brother Carl and I, because we're actually blood related to Peleg Walker.
And I think that's absolutely a kick. I get a kick out of that.
Things you do, you have your family history done, the things you'll come up with.
Yeah. No, that's something that's a little envious of that. I'd kind of like to say I was related to a famous legend, but
you are.
But it really does
Island,
look to me in poking around. I really believe that Peleg Walker truly loved the business.
Yes.
And the thing was, as I eventually got to meet a woman who lives here in town, whose great grandfather was known as a local historian, and her grandfather, his son, they would take the kids around and tell them all the stories of Foster's. Don't forget this. Don't forget these great stories of Foster. And when he died in the late 1930s, just before he had died, on the back of the only existing photograph of the ruins of the mill, when there was still some of the walls standing, some of his daughters standing in front of it, on the back side of it, he made the notation that a guy in the wee hours of the night, the small hours of the night, took his life, cut his own throat, and the blood poured down the stairs. I saw that. Now you think, well, wait a minute, I thought he hung himself by the rope.
Right.
And ask yourself this.
How the legend goes.
If he hung himself in the middle of the night, wouldn't the bell have rung and woken everybody up before the morning? Well, in 1948, a woman named Clara Wade Clemens had written an article for the Windham County Transcript, and it was on the story of the Ramtail. And she was talking to folks in the area, and they told her that a despondent employee had hung himself in the mill, and a guy named Potter had cut his throat in the mill. So I feel that there were two suicides, and this is what, I brought this with me because I'm terrible at quoting poetry. I wish I was one of those people that could just spout off, all these great poems, but we have a poem here that I came across, and it was written by Marcia Barden, who was a member of the Hopkins family. She wrote it in 1884. Now, a member of the Hopkins family would know the story of the mill quite well, and she wrote this very lengthy poem about the Ponagansett.
Yeah.
And when she gets to this spot in the river, she writes, Under low arched bridges through the alder thicket, past the tumbling ruin of the haunted mill, where the ghosts and goblins hold their midnight revels, and the forms of suicides, the passer's blood will thrill. And what caught my eye was the fact that she made the word suicide plural. Suicides.
Yes.
And it doesn't help the poem to make it plural. It wasn't like she was going for a rhyme scheme.
Right.
But it was important for her to say suicides. Now the other thing is there is a story that I've been not able to confirm, but Pat Morgan says she's heard it too, that a young girl drowned in this pool, and that her mother, distraught, filled her apron and dress pockets with stones and walked in there and killed herself.
Really?
Now, there's been a ghost of a lady seen by this pool, and I've always wondered, well, Betsy Grayson would be the obvious candidate.
Right.
Or is it this other suicide victim? So I think there was a night watchman who hung himself in the mill. People say that Peleg Walker was the night watchman, but no, he was an esquire. He was a mason. He was a man of means. It was his job to lock it up. And maybe at times he did take fire watch or something like that. But it would seem to me that, night watchman was, not really his occupation.
He was one of the owners,
exactly.
Business partners. Yeah.
So it was his responsibility to lock it up, and he had pride in that. But I'm thinking that someone did, in fact, hang themselves by the bell rope. Mm-hmm. And I have people saying, no, the truth is, it's just more grisly. You don't want to tell children when you tell them the campfire story. That what he did is, I've seen the documents in the town records. It says that 1:15 in the morning on May 19th, 1822, is when it legally leaves his hands, his portion of the business. Mm-hmm. He ushers everyone home after that horrible argument. He locks himself in the mill, and he sits there, probably looking at his pocket watch, knowing that 1:15 in the morning, he's no longer a man of means. The town's been laughing at him. There's less than 3,000 people living in here. Oh, Mr. Big Shot. Oh, he's fallen off his high horse. The shame of it all. He took a cutting instrument and took himself ear to ear. And as one of the Tuckers said, I believe the gentleman's name was Herman Tucker, he said as a small boy, his mom worked here at the mill, and the blood stain still went down the stairs. Now, I don't want to sidetrack too quickly, but I brought some psychics down here because I'm fascinated with human psychic ability. Right. And I brought two gals, one from, actually both of them from Massachusetts, who didn't know where I was taking them. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if they'd pick up on Betsy Grayson, so I took them here to the bridge. And they're going, look, Andy, obviously that sign back there said Hopkins Mills, so there were obviously mills, we got a river here. And they keep going, there's a guy here with a weird name. And I said, Peleg? And she said, yeah, Peleg, it's a weird, and they look at it and go, it's a weird name. But he's telling us there was a mill back there and he loved it. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls grabs her throat and goes, oh my God, he took his own life in the mill.
Grabbed her throat.
And she goes, oh, like that. She goes, oh, he cut his own throat open. Oh, and she's looking like that. She's trying to shake it off, and she looks up at me, and her face looked different for a second. She goes, really? And I did it so they'd never get rid of me. My blood stains the floor. I love this place. They didn't. It was all about the money for them. And she goes, he knows you come down here. He wants his story straight. And I've got goose flesh, because here I am wondering if they'd pick up on the drownings in this pool. And yes. You yourself were almost one of those
as
a child, because the sucking muck.
Right.
She says there's something about the mud in here, and she was the second psychic to tell me about how dangerous the mud is at the bottom of this pool, who knew nothing about the area. Right. But I do believe, I can't prove it, of course, but I do believe there was more than one suicide in the mill. I believe there was a lowly night watchman, some guy who would take fire watch, and Peleg Walker. One was by hanging, and one was by cutting his own throat.
And the legend has kind of integrated those two historic characters.
Exactly. As you know, I tore the whole Dolly Cole legend apart.
Yes,
but what did I find out? I found out about Betsy Grayson, and I found that I didn't destroy a ghost story. I found that there were better ones intact. Right. Now, I think there is a story about Dolly Cole actually walking up Dolly Cole Hill. Mm-hmm. Pat Morgan said many, many years ago, she had a neighbor who said at dawn she saw what she took as Dolly Cole in white walking up the road. And, but then again, that's an assumption. We don't know whose spirit it could have been. But they call it Dolly Cole Hill because Dolly used to walk up that hill and wait for the stagecoach to make its first break before it came down the hill. Mm-hmm. to go into Hopkins Mills.
Yeah.
So she could get the scuttlebutt before everybody
Oh,
else
wow.
did. So they call it Coles Hill
Wow.
because she like kind of owned the hill, so to speak.
Yeah.
But in tearing apart that legend, I found out who started it. It was an early legend, and the guy had his facts completely wrong. It was easier to make something up than to do his research. But I found out just how haunted this area is. And the truth is, it isn't just Peleg Walker haunting here. There are several people haunting this place. But the odd thing is, Pat Morgan's had it said to her by psychics, and other psychics that I brought down here, they all say it. This mill is still here, it's still alive, and people are happy. They're still living in the time when the mill, and I had one psychic go, there's a woman standing here, she's humming a song. She's not singing it, she's humming it. And she's saying, I really want to show you the gardens. And she's here with, I'm assuming it's her husband and a child. I played my recorder back. There's a woman humming a tune on the recording. And she says she wants me to see the village. She goes, they're still here, Andrew. They never left. And this is like the third or fourth person with psychic ability that have taken down here saying, this village is still here to them. They're still living out. And why? Because it was a beautiful place. It was a successful place. And it was the tragedy of Peleg and the fight over the money and him taking his life that just started this snowball. Now, you know, Marjorie Matthews, I respect her research tremendously. The woman was a real researcher and historian, but she felt it was all about the fact that things were getting more sophisticated and advanced, you know, out in Pawtucket there.
Along with the Industrial Revolution.
And they couldn't keep up, but I've had locals go, Grandma and Granddad told me that nobody would work down there because of the darn ghosts. Now, and I think it was 1873 is when the mill was burned down. Now, I found a curious note, and someone way back in the early 20th century, somebody sat down a lot of elderly folks in Scituate and said, hey, can you just write down any memories you have of the area? And I found a guy who said, I remember the story about the Ramtail factory and how a bunch of drunks burned it to the ground and had and danced around like Indians and all that. And I'm like, well, that's kind of a silly story because the version I heard is the fishing in this river to this day is great. And the story I was told is the guys would get up early in the morning to come down here and they'd be fishing by the old mill. And they would see things going on in the mill and around it that was just like, out of here, get the stuff out of here. And they got so fed up with it, they felt the way to cleanse the area was to burn the mill to the ground. So there's one story that says it was a bunch of drunks. And there's one story that says it was the local guys. But there's also, it was also recorded that guys from Hopkins Mills did make a vain attempt to put the building out. But I mean, it just burned like, you know, a box of matches, I imagine. And it was over and done with. But it hasn't stopped the hauntings.
No, indeed.
No, it hasn't.
And people have actually seen apparitions here, full-bodied apparitions.
And I've seen what other people have seen out in the woods. I've seen what I've also witnessed in other locations, not just here in Foster. What looks like, the only way I can describe it, it looks like a translucent silk sheet moving through the air, almost like a jellyfish. And I've seen this type of apparition before, and thank goodness I had witnesses with me at these other locations and here at the Ramtail. Talking about it, you know what's odd? The PBS program, Haunted Rhode Island? Where they came down here and filmed? I'm watching that chuckling because their cameras were too small and their lenses weren't strong enough. But they're staring in a direction and they're talking about this weird light they're watching. And I'm chuckling because I've seen the same thing myself, so I know they're not nuts. They weren't making that up. I brought a woman and her daughter down here. Her daughter was doing a report, and I took her down here at night, and we saw it again. And I didn't tell them anything about it, but it moved through the trees. Two of the psychics I brought down here said, down the road, just off to the left, there's someone that hangs around down there. I think you've got like a spirit that moves around down there, stays there. I don't know if there was a house down there at some point or whatever. And they're pointing right to the same spot where I've seen this sort of effect. I was forcibly shoved down here by the head. Something hit me off the side of the head. And I couldn't explain it. I had someone standing right behind me. It wasn't an owl didn't fly into me or a bat, because that's what I was desperately wanted to believe, because it was just so creepy the way it happened.
And how forceful was that?
I'm talking like someone took their hand, put it to the side of my head, and went like that. And I thought, what, an owl just smack into me, a bat? But the weird thing is right immediately in front of me were all these dead skeletal pine branches. If a owl or a bat had hit me in the side of the head and kept going, it would have had to have crashed into all this bric-a-brac. And a very reliable young woman who I still investigate with, Alicia, was standing behind me. And she was like, Andrew, what just happened? She was looking right at me. And I said, did I just get like beamed by a bat or something? And my brain's thinking, Andy, where was the flutter of wings? If it was an owl, where's the sensation of the feathers? Owls don't collide into people. And she goes, Andrew, you just flinched, and I couldn't figure out why you did that. And I was just like, okay, just chalk that one up to another Ramtail mystery. But yeah, I've talked to quite a few people who have seen things, but the bridge here is a spot that I like to take people to when they ask me about the Ramtail, because this is one of the most haunted locations, I think, connected to the Ramtail story. Whoever this woman in white is has been seen from Hopkins Mills all along this stream and down toward the factory ruins. So whoever it is, I don't know. But if people go to my website, greenvilleparanormal.com, there is a recording I made just on the other side of the now closed down bridge in Hopkins Mills, standing down by the river. Nobody was around me. Beautiful, quiet night in April with a full moon. Nobody was near me. I played the recording back. I clearly have the recording of someone coughing up water. It sounds just like someone choking up water. And then quite a few years later, in the month of July, I took two friends of mine from Massachusetts, and we sat down here on the sand, and the sun was starting to set. And Brian, one of the guys, was moving in his chair. He didn't hear it, but I clearly heard from right about here on the side of the pool, and Brian told me he reacted to it too. We clearly heard the sound of someone coughing as if they were choking up water. We both heard it. So is it Betsy?
Thank you for watching PEGRI TV.